Hi Andy, lovely to meet up with you and begin doing some work on your game. Just a quick recap of the points that we discussed relating to the accumulators and the way that they load from P1 to P2 and then from P2 to P3. With yourself, it's a case of sort of less is more. There's a lot of really good stuff going on in the swing. You're very good. Your alignments at impact are very good. Shot pattern tends to be really tight. The occasional wide that creeps in there for not for no apparent reason, but you have difficulty explaining why that occurs. You sort of feels as your feel as to why it occurs was really accurate. It's that setting of the club is a little bit too steep, followed by an excessive shallowing that you make work, but you could achieve in a much more efficient manner, and that's what today was all about. So when we look at Grant over on the right, what we're seeing is a incremental loading of the accumulators, and the main two accumulators that we discussed were accumulator 2, which is the loading or cocking of the wrists, and accumulator 3, which is the rolling of the left hand or left arm, if you will. That's how we're going to relate it anyway. So what we see is, Grant's got a pretty low handle location on this shot. I would suggest he's hitting a little cut. You don't need to lower the handle. I certainly wouldn't want to see you do that. But really concerning more about the loading pattern that he has on the way back. So you can see that there is a element of vertical hinging of the wrists. So it's set up as a sort of 135-ish angle between arms and shaft, and by the time he gets to P3, that angle, if viewed from face on, is more like 90 degrees. So there's a definite hinging of the wrists, and there is also a definite sort of rotation of the lead hand. But it's done gradually, and that's one of the reasons it looks so organised and so nice. There's nothing jumping out at us at that point. And the main checkpoint that we used towards the end, was the butt of the club or the shaft and where it points at P3. And ultimately, I want the shaft of the golf club to be more on the target line than what we're seeing at the start of your session. So early in the piece, you would hinge the wrists a great amount. It's really sort of pushing the feel, maybe that you're pushing down on the handle of the club a little bit more than would be the norm. So pushing down on the handle with the pad of the left hand, loading accumulator 2, and there is very little loading of accumulator 3. So there's a lot of cock and not much roll. And as a result, by the time we get to P3, we have a shaft that is sitting quite vertically and pointing just out in front of the toe line, ever so slightly. And one of the things we then talked about was that you can load the club in many different ways, and you'll see different players loading in different ways. Some are more consistent than others. This is just an example of some loading patterns. I was doing a little video for a pal of mine and just demonstrating some different ways of loading. So that's pretty familiar to what you would see, perhaps with a little bit more hinging of the wrists. And you could have a lot of rolling in the back of the left hand without a great deal of hinging of the wrists. Then you can get the club to P2 by just dividing the elbows. There's no right, there's preferred ways of doing it. I wouldn't suggest doing too many. There's pushing down on the butt of the club. Shaft still gets to parallel. So you can see there's a lot of different ways. Some of those are quite comical, but there's a lot of different ways, and on a daily basis I'll see some diluted versions of those patterns that I'm demonstrating there. And we just want to try and tidy that up. So we saw that at P3, the butt of the club was very much towards the stance line at the start of your session. We then went out onto the range, made some swings with just the left hand, just trying to get an awareness of what was going on. And then we came back in and did a little bit further work, talked about some loading, And this is one of your swings where the feeling here is that you're going to raise the handle a little bit at setup. As you go back, you're going to feel like the handle stays high. You can see straight away that starts to tidy up P2. Previously, we would be looking like this. So there would be more cocking of the golf club, cocking of the wrists. And the toe end of the club would be a little bit more toe down. The feeling then is to load accumulator 3 during the backswing. Now that was one of your early efforts. You didn't do that enough at that point. We went back out onto the range, did a little bit more work, started to build up an appreciation of, how accumulator 2 loads, how that affects accumulator 3. Loading 3 a little bit more at that point. So that's you building up your awareness, swinging back to P2. You got P1 to P2 pretty quick, to be fair. It's that P2 to P3 that is going to take a little bit more getting used to. So I'm just going to leave that on the screen. Just take that back down to P2. Go back to your original swing. Swap those over and take a little look and a comparison of those P2s so that you can see that there's a little bit less load into the wrists early in the piece. So, too much hinge, a little bit less hinge. The more hinge you have, the harder it is to load accumulator 3. And I'm just trying to get one of your better examples where we've pushed up or allowed the club to work up a little bit more. So don't push down on the butt of the club quite as hard. P2 changes dramatically. Really, really like that change. Really happy with that. It puts the elbows, you mentioned some of the feels you were getting, was that the right elbow wasn't quite as high. And therefore it was making it a little bit easier to then make the transition. See the shaft not setting as steep. And we talked about the bare minimum requirements. So at the start of the session, let's run that on a little bit further. At P3, shaft of the club sitting pretty much towards the stance line. Towards the end of the session, shaft of the club midway between the stance line and the target line. Now, ultimately, as we saw with Grant, I would want the butt of the golf club pointing a little bit more towards that target line. So I want to see this more, so that the shaft of the golf club and the hands are hitting the base of the right bicep at P3. However, I am willing to work with, if you will, and I think you could work around the set that you see on the right hand side of this screen. That requires less of a shallowing in the downswing and starts to promote some nicer feels for you during the rest of the swing. So club doesn't get quite as far across the line. Importantly for you, the club doesn't get as far in behind the hands at P6. So again, sweet spot well in behind the hands. The feeling you had here was that you were coming over it. And we talked about you just actually coming less from the inside. So you've got a swing that's directed less from the right. You can see though the position of the club head relative to the ball. So it's a more inline swing. Your body movement through the ball is very good, very passive with the hands, use the body well. But if the shallowing of the club gets excessive, like we see on the left, the potential for pushing or hooking is greatly increased, especially with your longer clubs. As the wrist angles uncock, you've very little control over the rate of closure on the golf club. Exit's a little bit lower on the right, which you'd expect to see due to this sort of different sweet spot location at P6. So less is more. Bear in mind the bare minimum requirement is at P3, we want the shaft or the butt of the club to be pointing somewhere between the stance and the baseline, the target line. That's the bare minimum requirement. However, ultimately, I'd like to see you work it more like we saw with Grant, towards or on the target line, and that's done by loading accumulator 2 a little bit less from P1 to P2, allowing you to then load accumulator 3 a little bit more from P2 to P3. As I said during the session, don't stand on ceremony. If you've got any questions, fire the email across, text, WhatsApp, whatever suits. If you have me on Facebook and Twitter, we can keep in touch. It's a nice way of sharing swings and information. Or just fire me an email across. I'll get this video link and any subsequent info across to you over the next sort of 48 hours. Good luck with it. Great working with you. Nice to meet you, and look forward to our future sessions in December. Well done.